Everybody, I'm Paula Rojas, Managing Director of Synergy Resource Capital. Welcome to another webinar of a series focused around natural resources and technology. In this episode, we will talk all things Peru with our representative there, Saenz from BLB Advisory.
Hi, Paula. Thanks for having me. I've spent, the better part of my life, or all of my career, looking at mining finance in Latin America. First based in New York, then moved down here to Peru with Standard Bank, and spent a total of 10 years in Standard Bank between New York and Peru, developing the mining business for the bank in Latin America, based in Lima. So that's giving me a pretty wide experience in terms of mining products and mining development in the different stages of development, from exploration through to early stage financing.
I think it's also of interest. You've mentioned, you touched on a little bit about the smaller plays. I know that there's some activity in relation to aggregating some of these small players into these processing plants and sort of like taking the feed from different small groups. I know about 2 or 3 of them. Is that a sector that is growing? Is that an opportunity to do that, do you think?
It's a sector that has been growing for the last few years. It's certainly an interesting sector. It's also a very competitive sector, right? And it's competitive in 2 very distinct aspects. It's competitive because you've got a number of small miners, okay, whose loyalty is to whomever is going to pay them the highest price, the quickest. So the long-term contract that you would want to do to secure feed for your plant, that's very difficult to obtain. And that makes it a very competitive and difficult market, and very much, very capital intensive and very dynamic. That's a way to put it, dynamic, right? But it's also very competitive because you have. You still have a big part of the Peruvian sector as an informal sector, right? So it's got, you've got plants that are illegal, okay, and as such they don't have a cost structure, they don't pay taxes, etc. That informality is also a source of competition, right? But again, depending on where the commodity prices are, that's always, that you're always going to find miners that are looking to look at these opportunities, and with the high prices that we've had in the last couple of years, and as we talk, copper's at highs, etc. You're going to have small mining areas that are making money at these levels, and that production needs to find a home for processing, right? So there's been a big push in Peru to formalize both the mining and the processing, but it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle. It will always be. Obviously, COVID didn't help in terms of formalization and stuff like that, and that's one of the topics that you want to talk about. But but it's one of the challenges that the government also has. There's a huge amount of tax revenue that the government loses because of that informality. So they are incentivized to solve to solve those issues.
Do you think that one possible, probably not solution, but a pathway to a solution would be to do something similar to what ENAMI does in Chile? So having a sort of state-owned company that buys material from different small miners, or is that not a desirable thing to do in Peru?
Yeah, maybe you're asking the wrong person for that, because I've never been one to believe that state-owned enterprises are efficient. Okay, I mean, and Peru had a state-owned enterprise. I mean, Centromin, what is today, care and maintenance or defunct, the La Oroya operation, the metallurgical complex, was actually a custom smelter that was built as a custom smelter to service all of the small, mid-sized and small mines in the center of Peru. Not only the ones owned by the government, but also all of the small miners. I mean, that was their version of Enami in Chile, and it was not successful. Enami in Chile is not successful, right? I mean, it's successful in terms of being the buyer for all of these mid-sized to small miners, but it's not successful in the sense that it's not, it's not economically viable. I mean, it's not it loses money hand over fist. So I mean, that's sort of telling. I think that all of that needs to be market driven, and it needs to be with private enterprise. But obviously, it needs the support from the government in terms of the regulatory environment.
I think we have a visitor.
I know. he's attention starved.
You touched on COVID, and that's obviously something that we should cover. How did this situation, how did COVID or how is still COVID impacting the country on one side, and with I know there's been a few lockdowns. I know you've been locked in your house. We've had many calls that you couldn't, you were telling us that you couldn't leave the house. So you've had lockdowns. How did that impact the general public and sort of the country in general, and how did that impact the mining industry in particular?
Well, I mean, COVID affected Peru like it affected, everyone in the world. Peru was one of the countries that, from the beginning, had a very strict lockdown. I was very proud of the lockdown and of the economic measures that were following the lockdowns. And I guess at least in the numbers, it was successful in I don't know if controlling is the word, but managing COVID early on. But the deficiencies in the countries, fairly quickly caught up to them. Deficiencies such as, a very poor health sector, not really prepared for something like this. A very undeveloped economy in the sense of a very large informal economy. Okay. That had a number of very deep effects in terms of the mid to long term aspects of COVID and lockdowns. Okay, so it hasn't been a success story. Peru's fight against COVID has not been a success story, but by any means. Today we still have partial lockdowns in the sense that we still have a curfew. More than a year after the first lockdown, we still have a curfew. And we've got restrictions, but in the end, the country I don't think the country economically could sustain another long lockdown, okay, and paralyzation of activities. As it was, we probably had about, depending on the industry, between 3 to 6 months of complete stoppage in most industries in Peru, including mining. Mining was not one of the first ones to come online. It's probably on the second or third wave to come online. So you had a very profound impact in terms of lower production and the the economic health of the companies. I would say 100% of the companies are nearly 100% of the companies are now back online. They have been for a while. Their cost structure has obviously changed quite a bit. Productivity is not what it used to be because of social distancing and having to have very strict testing before you go on site, etc. So that's increased costs, lowered productivity, and I guess all of that has been sort of made up by the increase in prices. One of the things that affected in a very positive way the zinc miners, for example, the zinc and lead miners, the polymetallic miners that I was talking about, it's a very big part of the mid-sized mining world in Peru, was that the treatment charges for concentrates, which were so weighed so heavily in favor of the smelters at the end of 2019, because of the worldwide lockdowns and hence a reduction in mine production, that balanced out the market, and that market turned around. I mean, the treatment charges were turned in favor of the mining companies quite dramatically in the last year. So that improved their finances in a big way. But 2020 is going to be a year to be remembered because of the profound effects of COVID. Not only the financial effects, but the economic effects. But obviously, in a number of mining operations, you had some very severe outbreaks. And Peru is up there in terms of the countries with some of the highest death tolls per capita. So it's been tough.
Yeah. I think it's been. I think you touched on one of the key problems in terms of most of Latin America, in terms of the economic effects, the informality of the economy, like such a big percentage of the economy being informal, meaning is cash, physical cash moving. When you can't see people and when you can't touch and you have to be at home and all that, then it becomes really hard to continue doing business as usual when you can't be touched. I think the before we touch on the topic that is the hot topic of today, I wanted to just quickly ask you if there's any trends or in mining that you see any local trends that you're seeing come up either because of COVID or because of what's happening. If there's any sort of new things happening or in general before we touch on the elections, that it's going to be our last topic for today.
Well, I mean, I think I honestly thought that the advisory business would dry up when COVID came around. I mean, thought that people were just going to take a break, even a short one, in terms of their investment appetite, et cetera. And it hasn't. I mean, it's been very busy throughout COVID and really in the last year. I don't think I've ever seen as much available capital in looking at the mining sector ever. Okay, I mean there is a lot of appetite. And a lot of appetite, in all of the of the different levels of risk and development, and that's something good to see. Because of that, of the effects of COVID, you've also had a lot of companies looking more for debt and equity to be able to go through the tough times, and also being opportunistic in terms of acquiring. So I think, the difficulty has been really matching the capital with the investment opportunities, because when you have higher commodity prices, all of a sudden everything becomes economic. Okay, and that's a very, and of course, with higher prices, higher expectations, and not so much higher valuations, right? And in the end, the fact that there's a lot of cash or a lot of capital doesn't mean that that it's that it's it's not ignorant capital, right? I mean, at some point you start looking at where the flows have been, and how shop soiled an asset might be, and it's not that big of a market for the opportunities out there. There are limited opportunities. There's a lot of cash, and you really have to pick and choose. So that's been a challenge, but really, as an overall trend, I don't think I've seen this much this much capital coming into mining, not only in Peru but in Latin America in a very long time, if ever.
Do you see? I know your focus is mostly on mining, but do you see any of that capital being deployed in other sectors in foreign investment, and talking about energy or technology more general, or not so much?
Well, I mean, because I focus on mining, that's really where I've seen it. But I would say in general, Peru has seen a lot of investment interest in every sector. I mean, until about a year and a half ago, I mean, everybody wanted to invest in Chile. And then Chile had this social, political, economic, blow up, implosion that shocked everyone. And I think still has, it's still affecting investment. And really the next place was Peru, right? I mean, Argentina is a bit of a political roller coaster, and has been for a while. Brazil managed to, make a lot more problems for themselves. Colombia, which for a very long time was a good investment destination, at least in what mining is concerned, really wasn't able to keep the interest because of changes in legislation, etc. Ecuador and Bolivia also, with political issues. So, you have a percentage allocated for Latin America, and there's not that many other places to go to, right? So, and then Peru continues to be a good place for opportunity. So you've seen a lot of inflow into Peru in all of the sectors.
Okay. All right. So as we promised, we're going to talk a bit about the elections. It's making a lot of noise. Everybody's wondering. I get a lot of questions on social media about, like, what's happening in Peru? What are we gonna do? Like, is this the end of the world? And what's happening? So I know it's really hard to forecast and tell the future. But we're gonna try give some insight into why this happened. Like, there's a reason why this person got such a an unexpected result. The candidate, you're going to talk about the candidates, and you're going to sort of explain what happened, where we are, and what do you see coming.
Well, yeah. I guess I'll start this by disagreeing with with this being unexpected, right? I mean, just like we could, disagree with the comment that it was unexpected in Chile. I mean, you talk to people in Chile, and they're like, this was brooding. This sentiment was brooding for years, and it's about time that something happened, and it happened in Bolivia. Okay, I mean, it happened in Bolivia, and that's what took Evo Morales to power. And when they finally got him out, his opposition couldn't get organized enough to be able to win the next election, and now, there's a Morales supporter. I mean, Morales associate, if you will, in power in Bolivia again. So I wouldn't say that it's unexpected, because that same sentiment has been growing in Latin America for a few decades now. Okay, and I guess one of the effects of COVID has been the impact on the economy, the impact on the death toll, the impact or the realization that the health sector is very deficient, that the government hasn't taken care of its people, and the government has really been led by a political class that's looked after their own. That's not what I think, but it's what the majority of people think. Well, I sort of think that as well, but that's beside the point, right? I mean, I think, but that sentiment has been growing, okay? In Peru particularly, you've had a lot of uncertainty over the last few years. You've had a change in, Congress was shut down last year. The interim Congress, deposed the previous president before this election. So we had an interim president. We actually had an interim president for less than a week back in October, I think it was. I mean, and I arrived in Peru in 1998. When President Fujimori was still in power, and then he resigned via fax from Japan in September of the year 2000. And I mean, since the year 2000 until now, I would say that you've always had a level of uncertainty where some left of center candidates have come to power, and the question was, well, the rhetoric, et cetera, what's going to happen? So I mean, it's. I'm not going to compare those instances with these, with what we're living with today. I mean, the leftist candidate certainly has a much stronger rhetoric than any other previous leftist candidates that have made it to a second round. Okay, and if he acts on 50% of his rhetoric, it will have a very profound impact on the Peruvian economy over the long term. Okay. Now, I'd like to think that gone are the times where someone just becomes elected president and becomes a dictator and starts nationalizing industries and stuff like that. I mean, there's checks and balances. He's going to win. If he does win, he's going to win by a very. I mean, he's not going to have a majority in the end. Okay, and the Congress is still going to be very divided, and that actually goes for both of the candidates. I mean, the rightist Fujimori and the leftist Castillo, both are going to be facing a very difficult Congress. I've been here for since '98, so 21 years, and I've seen a lot of this uncertainty, and I was managing investments, with those uncertainties for Standard Bank and for investors. So throughout those 20 plus years of uncertainties here, uncertainties there, the common theme has been that the investment rules have been, accepted, they've been followed. There have been no nationalizations in the past. Things have continued to move forward. Okay, and I'd like to think that if the leftist candidate is elected, that his rhetoric of today is not going to be his acting of tomorrow. Okay, he has had moments of distancing himself from some of the extreme rhetoric that puts him right next to Chavez and Maduro and Venezuela, etc. But obviously, the noise that's being created by this election is not good for the economy. Okay, I think if Castillo was elected, it would scare away investors. But I think it will. From scaring away investors to actually nationalizing the mining industry, that's a very big step, and not one that I think can be. That's not a decision that Castillo or anybody else can take lightly. Okay, not when it represents such a large part of the economy. So I think there are fundamental differences between what happened in Venezuela, what potentially happened even in Bolivia, etc., to what could happen in Peru. Mining is here for the long term, and I think these kinds of situations also bring opportunities. And you have to. You have to learn to live with what you have to accept what you cannot control. And right now, if, as I was telling someone today, if Castillo gets elected and people's worst nightmares come true, well, it's already too late, right? I mean, the second round is a little over a month from now. So there's not much you can do now. There is going to be flight of capital. You're seeing it already. And there is uncertainty in terms of new investments. But, by now, those people that don't want to see Castillo know that they have a very big incentive to vote against them. I think that the opposition to, I think both sides. I mean, the left and the right side have a lot of soul searching to do to figure out how their own fragmentation has taken them to these levels, right? And I'd like to think that those that are much more market oriented would take this as a lesson to realize that joining forces gives more stability going forward to the country, as opposed to being so fragmented. That's what brought us here, and that as much as Peru has always talked up its economy and its reserves and its economic health, that it had some some deficiencies which have always been around, but which were brought to light a lot, in a very tough way by the pandemic, and have resulted again in some very tough times. So I think that's what I can tell you, Paul. Not sure if I gave you answers or any predictions, but
well, yeah. So you've explained why this happened. It's been, as you said, it's been brewing for some time. There's been some unrest with how the political parties have been sort of or the establishment has been protecting themselves, and then you explain what you think could happen, and I think that's helpful for people looking into this. I've seen similar situations in other countries, as you know, we've talked about many times about Argentina, and as much as I love Argentina, it can be a basket case, and I say that with love. But at the same time, I agree with you in the terms of the good thing about these Latin American countries is, even though there is uncertainty, political uncertainty, and there can be corruption and all these things, the reality is there is a framework of institutions that can, in most countries at least, that can, in Peru, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, those are the ones that we focus on. Those countries have institutions that would, even if someone with less than ideal or less with an approach that is less friendly to the markets or the international scene, you can still do business. You just have to be very organized and know that you need to focus on taking care of the local situation. But the checks and balances that the Congress can do with, if you have the government, you have a president that is tricky to call, to say something
Yeah,
nice.
but I mean, unfortunately for Peru, that institutionality that you mentioned has actually been failing in the last few years. I mean, the judicial system has been found to be highly corrupt, okay, and no longer trusted. The Congress has been found to be corrupt, certainly not trusted, and of late being very populist, right? I mean, to the extent that they impeached a president and kicked him out of office on what many people believe was an abuse of power by Congress, right? So I mean, you have a bit of a power vacuum that now is extending to, to the executive, to the presidency, that does provide with a cause of concern. Not so much about whether the pro market or the against market come onto power. Of course, that's always going to be a concern, but about the uncertainty that's going to follow when you have a system that's not working perfectly, or some would say is broken. And what saved Peru has really been that the economy just keeps on moving, keeps on growing, and it's been helped by good global markets, right? So life in Lima sort of becomes insulated of the political scene, because because life goes on, and the economy is still doing well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess the Soli, you said before, it's about a month away, so we'll know very soon which way this is going to go, and for some of us, and I mean, for all of us with investments there or some interest there, we'll just have to wait and see what happens, and then we'll. But at least it's not that far away, so we'll know very soon.
We will know very soon. So the uncertainty, again, for the last 20 years, I've seen some level of uncertainty. that I'm not going to say is comparable to this one, but you know, as a banker, when you have to go to credit committees, I mean, you know, any uncertainty is unwelcome. So I've seen these, and again, I mean, it's not about comparing; it's about looking at the similarities, not the differences, right? And and the outcomes. And you know, a lot of people expected that you know, very pro markets Pedro Pablo Kuczynski was going to be, you know, a great president for Peru, and that, you know, that dream was gone in less than a minute. So.
All right. Thank you, Lucho. That was super helpful. I think it's going to be very interesting for viewers. Your views and your insight into the Peruvian mining sector and the general situation in the country over there. So thank you so much for taking the time. And as always, it's been a pleasure.
No, thank you very much for having me, Paula. It's always a pleasure talking to you and talking about the business. I probably talked way too much about it, so you'll have a lot to edit, I assume. So thank you very much.
Oh, it was fabulous. It was really, really interesting. I learned a lot as well, which is always good. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lucho. Until the next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave us a comment if you have any questions. And if you enjoy this video, subscribe to our channel for upcoming content around investment, emerging startups, and small cap stocks in natural resources and tech.